You know, normally we get a lot of comment over something I said or discussed on this show or my Fox News show, but this concerns something I wrote for our Fox Business website about all these bank fines, the latest $7 billion likely slapped on Citigroup, likely double that for Bank of America for their respective parts in a meltdown you would think that only they caused. So I started asking, where's the punishment for the politicians, the ones who egged them on, pushed them into making more loans, turned home ownership from a goal to darn near a birthright? Jane in Anthem, Arizona. Neil, I worked in the mortgage industry during the fiasco. Your accountability was the absolute best description I've read. The real truth is what the banks were encouraged and sometimes forced to do by our government. It's not widely been published. Thanks for you for this honest account. Jay in Carson City. Hey, you jerk. It's not just the banks that have paid a price for the, he said, damn. That's where I'm going to leave it. Financial farce. My family will never recover from the lost value of our home. And the banks pay every dime of the punishment they get. Get your effing facts straight before you start preaching. And J.A., banks are the only ones responsible for what happened? No one else? Zero? Just them? Really? Who is the jerk, sir? Who is the one who has to get his facts straight before preaching? Harry emails, thanks, Neil. First article I read in a long time placing the blame for the 2007 and 2008 financial breakdown where it belongs. Rick in St. Louis. Neil, good article, and some of your points like the Community Reinvestment Act are rarely mentioned anymore. Where do all the receipts the government has received in the form of penalties go? Does it go right back to the Treasury? Well, pretty much, Rick, it does. It all goes back into the same big old pot, and around she goes. All right, to our Fox Biz All-Stars, Monica Beta, Jonathan Honig, and Mattie Duppler. Jonathan, what do you make of this?
Yeah, well, Neil, there's been a con job perpetrated on the American public over the last 5 or 6 years, and this idea that Wall Street caused the collapse. It was greedy, profit-seeking financiers and unregulated speculators that caused the collapse. In fact, Obama made a video saying just that. In reality, all elements of the financial system that failed were regulated, and the ones that failed the most were regulated the most. You alluded to many of them, the Community Reinvestment Act. So, free markets don't fail, but we didn't have a free market, and that's exactly what caused it to fail and will continue to cause failures in the years to come. You know,
and I've been around long enough and covering all of this that I can distinctly remember Congresses and presidents of both parties saying, you're not lending enough. We've got a housing boom here potentially right beneath us. Why don't you get with the program, start lending more, loosen standards a little bit so we can get more people in on the fund. And this was the emergence of no-doc loans where people at $50,000 income could buy $1 million homes and better. They bear some responsibility. The politicians who egg this on bear some responsibility. Yet they're the ones who are handing out these punishments. I'm not saying that banks bear some responsibility for securitizing a lot of this stuff, collateralizing a lot of this stuff, selling suspicious debt on maybe unbeknownst to investors, even though a lot of those investors knew exactly what they were buying. But I'm tired of the blame game and then only blaming them for it.
Right. I mean, the question you're asking is an important one. Who's regulating the regulators? And the answer is no one, or they're regulating themselves. I mean, a lot of these guys over at the Consumer Protection Bureau, they have had all of their regulations essentially taken off of them with the advent of Dodd-Frank, and now they're acting as, regulators gone wild because they don't have rules that govern them the way that
Fannie and Freddie out of this.
Correct.
Because of their political kinship and friendship. So that's sort of like leaving Charles Manson out of the discussion of the Sharon Tate murders. But my only other issue, Monica, is, look, right after the meltdown, immediately Congress said, you lent too much, you were going crazy. A few months after the meltdown, they said, why aren't you lending? You're drying up lending. I tell you, these banks can't win for love or money.
Well, I think banks deserve the angst that they get, but to your point, which politicians are holding politicians accountable and which voters are holding politicians accountable? If you look at polls of how people feel about Congress...
How about the politicians right now who are telling you, open up the spigot, you're being too tight in your lending standards, the same standards that they advocated for right after the meltdown?
Right, and then we're talking about how there isn't enough jobs.
I want to see their photos in post offices around the country.
And aspects of Dodd-Frank have made it much harder for small businesses to actually get lending. There's all sorts of hypocrisy in all sides.
Because Washington's cures make the illness worse. That's where I come from, John.
And Neil, you saw the same thing. We mentioned Dodd-Frank a few times. Think back, a decade with Sarbanes-Oxley. That was passed in reaction to the last big financial crisis. You remember Enron and Adelphia. That caused a lot of small companies not to be able to go public because the expenses were raised so more. So every time we get a crisis caused by government, controls breed more controls. You get more controls. I think that's why, despite all the regulation that was supposed to fix the financial crisis, to the Monica's point, we haven't seen the lending pick up. We also haven't seen the job creation and employment pick up that's directly due to these controls on the financial sector.
Bottom line, we're all human beings, and we all make our own bed, and we all are realistic enough when we sign on a loan that we signed it. No one coerces it. I have yet to run into a McDonald's and the manager force-feed me a double quarter pounder. I did it myself.